Hello and welcome to the Manage Self Lead Others podcast, mainly for experienced and aspiring people managers. I'm your host Nina Sunday, and this is the show to help you explore ways to become the best version of yourself at work as a manager. Each episode you'll hear from some of the brightest business minds on the planet who share your passion to elevate and transform team culture. They'll share insights in self-leadership and leading others. Together, we can make workplace culture better. Are you ready? Because it's time to manage self, lead others. Simon Reynolds is one of the world's leading high-performance coaches for CEOs and entrepreneurs who coaches business leaders from all over the world. And one of his companies, founded in the year 2000 with only 2 people, 8 years later employed 6,000 staff in 14 countries and was valued at $500 million. He's won over 50 industry awards, including Advertising Agency of the Year twice, Gold Lion Cannes International Festival of Creativity, Grand Prize, London International Advertising Awards, Australian TV Commercial of the Year, Magazine Campaign of the Year, and Newspaper Ad of the Year. His book, Why People Fail, reached number 1 on the Australian bestseller list in both business and self-improvement categories. His latest book, Win Fast, is on executive productivity. With Simon's incisive thinking and brilliant business mind, he mentors CEOs and entrepreneurs from all over the world, from his homes in Los Angeles and Sydney. Welcome, Simon. You're a coach to CEOs and senior leaders. What's one mistake you find managers doing that, if they didn't do, would make a positive difference to team effectiveness?
Well, that is a terrific question, which managers should be asking themselves all the time. I would say channel capacity. So in my opinion, the greatest mistake, which leads to a whole raft of mistakes, is trying to do too much. And limiting what the leader does, I think, changes everything. It times 10 their focus on key things, and increases greatly the staff's focus on key things, and leads to a much greater chance of getting stuff done. Now, what tends to happen is in some companies is managers have this raft of changes that they're going to make. And if you look at the statistics, a lot of substantial strategic changes in companies don't work. They don't occur. They don't get done. The promise is not delivered. And all of this could have been greatly reduced if they just tried to do less and respected channel capacity.
Yes, now channel capacity, you mean the bandwidth of the team. What is the team capable of fitting in with what they're already being obliged to do? Is that what you mean by that?
Spot on. That we only, as humans, we only have a certain capacity to devote an amount of thinking time to getting a certain number of things done. And people don't respect that enough. I don't think that a leader should be working on more than 3 changes in their company.
And I know we're in a disrupted world where perhaps the need for massive change is important, but unless you bring people along with you and make it a human-centered approach to change, you might be issuing orders, but unless you win the hearts and minds of your individual contributors, that change initiative is going to fall over. It's going to flop.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, the team aren't idiots. In medium to bigger organizations, often they're listening to the leader talk about this raft of changes that they're going to make, and they don't believe it. They don't think it's going to happen. And so you don't get engagement. But when there's only 3 things that you're going to change, they do believe it. They know there's no escape. They know the leader's going to be focused on it.
That's right. If they don't fully believe it, they won't embrace it, boots and all, and they'll silently go, well, why should I even put my energy into that? Because it's going to fail anyway.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, and there's this pantomime where they're playing out a series of roles, looking like they're doing it, but not really putting their heart into it.
Yeah, that's the worst thing that a people manager can allow to happen. So now your Win Fast book has 80 productivity tips. It's probably the richest book I've come across dealing with the general area of time management, getting things done. Now, Often productivity is considered a personal responsibility in a team, but isn't that a bit hit or miss? How can a people manager inspire a team as a team to continuously improve their productivity?
Yeah, terrific question. Look, I think there's a terrible, terrible situation that's developed where almost no time is spent on productivity. The amount of training that is on strategy or on leadership, etc. But in the end, the only reason any particular goal occurs is through the productivity of the team. But when was the last time you walked through an office and people could say, you know what, I'd say we're 9 out of 10. I think we are world class at actually getting stuff done. And it's not the fault of the individuals. It's the fault of the leaders for not teaching them how to be productive. I mean, I find it extraordinary that you can go through 12 years of school and at the end of it, not have been taught how to get things done effectively. We live in a world that's full of logistics and materiality. The movement of things, the ability to interact with other people to get processes completed is absolutely vital. But most people, even intelligent people, will go through their whole career not studying how to be more productive. And it's a complete game changer when you do.
Exactly. And all you have to do is find a really good book and read it and apply what's in that book. Yours is now up there as definitely one of them. The other one, you might have heard of David Allen's Getting Things Done. His is all, was the best practice book in the early 2000s. But
Yeah,
I'm now thinking that yours definitely covers some of the classic best practice, but there's some new ones. And I'm going to mention some of them as we
great.
discuss. The chapter called Spend More Time in Field 4. Now, I didn't even know there were 4 fields, but the field 1 is things you're terrible at. We have to do some of those. Field 2, reasonably good at some things. Field 3, excellent at. And Field 4, stuff you're fabulous at and also enjoy. So can you speak to that, please, Simon?
Absolutely. There's a common belief that we should work a lot on our weaknesses and try and build our weaknesses up. And I can understand the line of logic there. But in reality, because we're short of time, a better use of our time is to take stuff we're good at and spend more time doing it and just handle a lot of the weaknesses or delegate a lot of the weaknesses when we can. Because two things happen when you do that. Usually there's more progress in the organization than just doing the drudgery of managing things you're weak at. And second of all, you start loving your work more if you're spending more time doing stuff you're fabulous at and that you enjoy. Now the reality is that we can't spend all our time on activities that we love, but we can do a lot more than we think by identifying how many units of time are we doing what we're really good at and that we really enjoy. And can I increase it? So for instance, let us say if I did an analysis of my time over a week, I might say, oh, I'm only spending 6 hours doing the stuff that I'm really good at. Well, how can I increase that to 9? And then it's obviously, we've made a major difference, I think, not only to our own enjoyment, but to the ultimate results of the company. And what is happening is when people do an analysis of their time, they're realizing they're not doing much stuff that they were actually hired to do, that they're really good at, that are their pluses.
And I'll tell you something, as a manager, when I had a larger team at one point in time, I had about 8 people under me, nothing like the 6,000 people you've managed at different times in your career. But, for me as a small business owner, 8 people was, I had to
Yeah.
manage them well. I can remember having one-on-one meetings with occasional people going through exactly what all their tasks were and asking them, which ones do you like best? Which ones do you dislike the most? And seeing if I could restructure, because my opinion was, why should I ask people to do stuff they don't like when there's probably someone else in the office that would happily take it on because that's their preference?
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. I mean, that's a very enlightened and very uncommon attitude to take, and you're obviously really thinking about management. And let's not forget that we live in a world where unemployment is very, very low, and anyone good is at any time can leave for more money to another job. So getting people to do stuff that they're really enjoying is not just a nice to have; it's a must have for staff retention.
That's right. Now, the other chapter that really impressed me was always look for the limiting factor. And we both share an admiration for, and this book is often behind me on my shelf, Eli Goldratt, who's now passed on. He wrote the book The Goal and a few others. He actually started life as a physicist and then became a management consultant. And it's in his book The Goal, he talks about theory of constraints, and you say look for the one limiting factor that is preventing progress, or that is the roadblock or the obstacle. Yes, tell us more about the importance of looking for constraints and then having a laser focus on fixing it.
Yeah, well, it's so great to talk to another fan of Goldratt because it's such a simple principle, but it changes everything and simplifies management to a great degree. There's so many managers that are just overwhelmed with what to do, and this really crystallizes their next steps. And as you've done a good summary of it, really, it's little more than, but also enormous in its implication than these steps. Number one, identify the key constraint in every situation. Let's take a factory, or let's take a company. There's one bottleneck. There's one thing that's slowing people down. It could be we don't have the right product, we don't have the right distribution, we don't have the right staff. On a factory line, there's a certain point that's not working. So number one, identify the constraint. Number two, in essence, there's I think 5 steps, but in essence, devote all resources, go overboard attempting to fix that constraint. So don't just say, oh, it's a constraint we need to fix, but put the full power of the organization to eradicate that constraint. And then once you've done that, look for the next constraint. And there is always a next constraint. And you can simply run your whole organization doing this, knowing that you really are spending the time on the most important thing every time, and that you're creating this continual loop of excellence that will really change the profitability of the company.
Absolutely. And it's a different question that you ask when you ask, what's the one thing that is preventing our progress or creating a bottleneck or a delay, as opposed to what's the 20% of tasks that we should focus on, according to the 80-20 rule. If you put your effort into the top 20% of tasks, you'll get an 80% result. So that's effort to results. So it's slightly different, isn't it? We can be working on our top 20%, but at the same time, what's the one thing that's getting in the way of us dealing with our top 20%? Is that how you would look at it?
Yeah, I think those two filters or frameworks work well together. In analyzing what your key constraint is, you're going to be looking at, well, how do you define that? Well, what's the impact if we fixed it? What is, can we affect the 80% of results by changing this, or are we better doing something else? So I think they work really well together. And like many, I'm a huge fan of Richard Koch, who has written, as you know, not one, but four books on 80-20 principle. And I was only coaching someone actually just before this call, and we were talking about, even though it's elementary, how profound it is, the 80-20 principle. 20% of our friends give us 80% of the fun. 20% of our plates in the kitchen we use 80% of the time. 20% of our carpet gets 80% of the wear. 20% of our shoes are being worn 80% of the time. Throughout the entire universe, 80-20 is running things, and to not address it, which is what most people do, is just crazy, because it's not just a business changer, it's a life changer.
Yeah, I can really recommend people read at least the first book of Richard Koch, which I've read, and he's written another 3. So there's a lot more to this principle. And I think what he said was most people think it's a 50-50 world, and it's not. And there's magic in that formula. Now, you then take the maths a little bit further, and another chapter is live by the 64-4 rule. Now, I needed to get back to the Kindle to read that after I listened to it to make sense of it, which is focus on the most important 20% of that 20%. And that means 4% of what you do accounts for 64% of your results. And focus on the top 4% of your current activities.
Yes, yes. And this is really, really interesting for people who are managers who are overwhelmed. So first of all, what's the 20% of what I could do that would make the 80%? And just doing that all day long, or as much as you can, will, dramatically increase your effectiveness. But inside the 20%, let's say there are 3 things you can do that will really make a difference in your company. Inside that, there's one of those, or 4 to be mathematically correct. Inside that, there's just 1 or 2 of those that are the 4%, are the best of the best, the most important of the most important. And the experts on 80-20 show that the 20% of the 80-20 of the 20 is 4%. And how profound that is, that when we think we've got a million things to do, only 4% of what we do will give us 64% of our results. And that is so refreshing and relieving to know we don't have to do that much to make a difference in our company.
And I'll tell you something, when I was working, before I had my business, working as a conference organizer, and when I learned to write down absolutely everything and then to work to priority, my life changed, because instead of having things rolling around in my head that I was relying on memory, it was all there on one sheet. And at the same time, I was just looking at the top of the sheet because my top priorities were there, which leads us to the other chapter, which is do your most important tasks first.
This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
And it's all about writing your list in order of priority and writing a top 6 at the end of every day. Is that how you organize your tasks, your task list?
Absolutely. I'm a massive believer in prioritization. And, we're using words that are commonly used in business lexicon. They're just not commonly done. I mean, most senior executives have a to-do list. But have they really spent 10 minutes staring at that to-do list each morning and carefully putting in numerical order the most important tasks first, right? No way. They're very loose in what they do. They do often the thing that's enjoyable or the thing that's immediate or whatever. But it's in prioritization that real success happens in our world, where we have too much to do. Here's the reality. We're never going to get all the stuff we have to do done in today's world, or almost never. So prioritization is super important. And it's been a breakthrough for me, because it's been confronting my own performance, to fully grasp that the most effective leaders are not the people who get more done. They are the people who get the most important things done and then try and somehow handle the rest. And that's all about prioritization.
Look, that one distinction really can take the monkey off your back and take the pressure off. If you realize, just be as effective as you can be with a laser focus, and don't worry about the fact that your task list is a mile long. I mean, as David Allen would say, that's all the someday maybes, and often they disappear anyway.
Yeah.
Just focus on what absolutely has to be done. And of course, you've got Brian Tracy saying, "Eat that frog."
Great book.
And while I always have my top priority, my frog may not be the very first thing I do, but it's definitely the second.
Yeah, and that takes real discipline, and it's it's a habit. It's a tough habit to try and do, But if you can be ruthless with that, and even just have it as your main attempt, your main focus, to do the most important task first, that changes everything. I'll just tell you very quickly. I had a friend of mine, Adam Davis, who won an Ernst & Young business award for being most successful in New South Wales in his category. So major business award. And he was the youngest at the time, the youngest head of a public company in Australia. And I think he was 28. And when he went to get the award, and I was at his table at the dinner, he said to the audience, I only try and do one thing a week. One thing a week. And if I do that, I've done at least 50 major things for my company in a year. And here's a person who had used that philosophy to great success. And it was a terrific reminder that we can just get so caught up in just trying to do too much. Now, obviously, he's handling other stuff, but he's identifying just one priority per week. And he built a great company as a result.
Yeah. You talk about in WinFast about just setting aside a small admin, a few hours once a week for admin tasks. And, it's all about language and filters and framing things. I had all these, just this week, I had all these little itty bitty tasks that had to be done. And normally I see them as an absolute interruption, but they had to be done. And then I went, oh, this is just my admin morning.
Yeah.
I just felt so much better about it.
Absolutely. And bunching all those admin tasks into one half day, like you said, or even one full day is a really powerful thing to do for the mind, because we tend to, as senior leaders, we tend to be agitated all the time because we're handling a million things, and some of them are admin tasks, and then some of them are strategic, and some of them are leadership, etc. And the brain switching all different styles of activity, and it's just completely overwhelming so often. Whereas if you just say, hey, I know that Thursday morning is my admin day or my admin half day, I'm just going to put it on a list. I'll get to that on Thursday. And suddenly you can relax.
Yeah, it's all about feeling relaxed and in control and knowing that you have a system and a timetable to get things done. So that's really good.
Yeah.
You talk about your 3 success protection questions. Mm-hmm. Question 1 is, what do I currently assume is true that might not be? Gee, that's a hard one to think about.
Well, yeah. And so the whole concept of the 3 success protection questions is there's a lot of successful people watching, listening to this podcast. And the truth is we can blow it at times in our career by not asking these questions. So what is it that I assume is right now that may not be? Because it's errant assumptions, as things we think were right but weren't right, that are often the worst parts of our career. And so by regularly asking yourself that question, it does protect enormously your level of success.
That's right. And then the next question is, what could possibly go wrong and what could I do if things went wrong? So they all go in together with, your success protection question.
Yes.
Yeah.
And simply saying, like, things are going great. Now look at every area. With my staff, what could go wrong? What would happen if someone left? Or with my strategy, what could a competitor do to sink me? What could possibly go wrong? And most people don't ask that question.
Yeah. I think relating to people that work for you, assuming that someone good is going to stay forever and not actually doing operations manuals or allowing them to have a lot of stuff in their head and not recorded or written down, that's probably a big error that people need to think about.
Absolutely. And you can sit there and it only takes, 20 minutes a month and schedule in your calendar to do it and look at what can go wrong. But imagine how much that's going to help you when things go wrong.
Now, another chapter is use zero-based thinking to quickly transform your life, which is knowing what I know now, would I still have done this? I reckon that question would get you, make you understand where you're feeling obliged or maybe where you feel a bit stuck. That's a good one.
Yeah, so often we are running strategies and trying to make the most of strategies that we shouldn't even be doing. And it's a noble part of humans that do that. But zero-based thinking is really about going blank slate. Before I work out how to fix this, should I even be doing it at all? Should I be even working in this company? Should I even be having this conversation with this staff member, or do I wish, if I doing it all over again, would I even have hired them? And if the answer is no, maybe I should get rid of them, etc., etc. And to continually go blank slate on this and evaluate everything we're doing, and say, is it something I should even continue? Very, very powerful.
So another chapter is apply the +1 method. Remembering you've got 80 chapters, so I'm only getting to the top 10% according to my preferences. So apply the +1 method, and that's an important one. Is there another way to do this? Is there a better way to do this? Is that how you interpret that one?
Yeah, pretty much. So what happens is that we often don't take much action in the course of, say, 6 months as leaders, because the magnitude of what we're trying to do sometimes overwhelms us. A classic example of this is people will often have something on their to-do list in their company that's quite important, but it could be a year before they even get to it, because it's not immediately demanding. And so the +1 formula is simply this: what's one thing I can do right now to make this better? So for instance, let's say we have low morale in our company. So instead of creating some amazing series of social events or a series of long meetings with them, what's one thing I could do to lift morale right now?
That's a good question.
I could do to lift morale, right? And just +1, +1, +1, +1 in all areas of our business can be done in minutes often, and yet it really adds up.
And that can tie back to theory of constraints, because if you see a constraint, instead of seeing it as, I've got to do a complete restructure, you can go, what's one thing I could do that could actually fix that constraint? So you tie in +1 with theory of constraints, and suddenly, you're moving forward.
Well, that's it. And momentum is showing in the quality of the company's output, but it's also very motivating for the leader themselves and the team to see progress happening. Anthony Robbins said something that I think is largely true: happiness equals progress. And I think that when we, even if we're starting with a low base in any area of our life or any area of our business, when we see momentum, when we see progress, we feel much better about everything. And that's important.
One of the earlier episodes of this podcast with Lynn Kazali, who wrote the book Ish, she talks about perfectionism often getting in the way of progress, and to know when you've reached a point where the completion is adequate rather than being perfect, because progress is more important than being perfect. So that ties in with that.
And what a great title for a book too. I'm a huge believer in that for leaders, because I'm a big believer in the 80% principle, that do for most things, 80% of them, 80% is good enough. No, yeah. and there's so much work to get that up to 100% often. Some things have to be perfect, like engineering a building, but a lot of stuff, the client doesn't care. Your staff don't care. It's not going to make much of a difference, but it's going to take you another 10 years to make it, 10 hours to make it 100% better. So just do everything 80%.
And I often think about how many people are going to be looking at this. If it's one person, I have to know when I've reached the 80% mark. If it's 1,000 people, well, then maybe I delegate someone else to finish it for me, because it's just
great point.
Needs to be tweaked.
Yeah.
I do like the chapter on put on someone else's head. And there have been times in my life where I've thought, what would so-and-so think about this? So it's perfect advice.
Well, this is, I originally came from the advertising industry. And, when you professionally come up with ads, you spend most of your time not having enough ideas, right? So you just sit there with a blank pad. And so I over time, I tried all these different techniques. And one that really helped is I'd literally pretend I'd take my head off and put it on the desk. I'd say, now, what would Einstein do with this situation in my company? Or, and then I put his head off, and then I'd say, okay, what would Donald Trump do? For better or worse? Well, how would he solve this? And then I'd put that down there and say, okay, What would the Kasparov, a great chess player, do here? And so by doing that just over the course of half an hour and spending 5 minutes pretending you're those people, it enables you to access different ways of thinking as you imagine they think. And you very often end up with lateral answers.
Well, we're sort of coming to the close of our conversation, Simon, and it's been absolutely fascinating. Is there one productivity tip that if you're writing the book again, you'd add in that's not already there? Like you've come to you come to an awareness as an author that, oh yeah, that was an important idea and I didn't manage to fit it in at the time.
Yeah, fascinating. Perhaps the importance of being centered before you do anything, before you do any of the productivity stuff. Can you just take 5 or 6 deep breaths, settle yourself, and just take a moment to center yourself? Because I think the difference in our effectiveness as a manager or a leader when we're centered versus attempting to do the same things when we're not centered is an entirely different result, a much better result. And perhaps I'd add a whole section on how to be centered. I think that state management is very underestimated inside workplaces. That you take some people might say he's the best business person in the world currently, Bezos, and Jeff Bezos, certainly the richest person currently, but there would be varieties in his state where some days he'd be driving home and he'd go, I wasn't that good today. So if the world's best businessman also has state variance, then we all do. So how do we make sure we're in the best state of mind? That's something most people aren't even asking, but it leads to a tremendous improvement in output.
Well, Simon, I just also want to share with you, I've attended your Business Accelerator some years ago, and the one thing that always springs to mind when I think of you is own the indecision period. This is a sales tactic that you told us. We're sort of touching on not something that was in WinFast, but I just wanted to acknowledge that owning the indecision period, in other words, you send a quote or a proposal or an action plan to a potential new client and you're waiting for them to make a decision. Even if you do follow up or stay in touch, just to keep sending them new information that's relevant and appropriate so that they're not actually persuaded or wooed by a competitor that just happens to come along when they're ready to buy because they just forgot how good you were.
Absolutely. We put all this effort and money and time into acquiring the lead. We put all this effort into doing the proposal. And then at the very moment that they're making a decision, we barely do anything. We send an email like, hey, if you've got any questions, just let me know, or stuff like that. The marketing should be as strong in the indecision period, which may only be 3 days or 1 week before they come back with their choice, should be as strong at that point as it should be in the before and the during part of the sales process. And in 9 out of 10 companies, it's super weak at that point.
So I've got a list, I've got a little spreadsheet of what I call OTIP emails, own the indecision period. These are my OTIP emails that it's like I'm sending updated information, but for me, it's an opportunity to stay top of mind with a potential new client before they make the decision to proceed with my company. So I want to thank you for that one.
Oh, absolute pleasure. So glad that someone's actually listening.
Yeah, it's rewarding when you know that people are actually applying what you have found to be true. Well, Simon, thank you so much. I think this episode has definitely touched on some terrific points that will help everybody's productivity and processes. So thank you for your generous time today.
Well, thank you for such insightful questions. It's a real art to ask great questions, and you asked some terrific ones, and I'm appreciative.
My pleasure. Thank you. Today we've been speaking with the amazing Simon Reynolds on the Manage Self, Lead Others podcast. I'm your host, Nina Sunday. Remember to subscribe and listen to Manage Self, Lead Others wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, ciao for now.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.